Okay, so today what we're going to be working on is looking at two packages that are available in Unity. Just for reference, they're already installed in the project I handed out to you guys. There were quite a few packages included, so I figured it'd be easier just to get us started quick to give you guys the entire project, and you could just open it and start working. But just for your own reference, I have already installed in this project. We have Cinemachine, which is the virtual camera system we're going to be playing with first. And I also have the input system because it's using that. ProBuilder and ProGrids for some of the little levels I set up. And then the big one is Timeline, that actually comes installed in Unity already. So we're going to be using that as well. But it is part of this project. So what we're doing today is first we're going to be looking at Cinemachine from a gameplay perspective. So we're going to be setting up 3 different types of Cinemachine cameras. Once the project is open, you can actually see there are 3 different scenes here. I have a side scroller, which we're going to start with. We're going to do a basically 2.5D camera following a 3D character running around a 3D world. There is also a first-person scene here, where we're going to set up a first-person camera using Cinemachine, and also a third-person scene, which is actually almost identical to the first-person one, but we'll be setting up a third-person camera that will be very similar to the third-person camera we set up in lesson 1 of our Unity 2 class, but we'll be using Cinemachine for it. And after we are done with Cinemachine, we're going to take a look at Timeline. So Timeline's really interesting. Have you guys used the, what do they call it, the matinee system in Unreal?
View sequencer.
Oh, sequencer, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if matinee's old, I can't remember. That was a UDK thing. I don't know if it's anything in Unreal is still called matinee. But basically it's a, which I can show it to you. Oh, it's not going to show anything yet. But basically, it is a timeline-based track-using system. So if you've ever used like any sort of video editing software or audio editing software, basically you have a timeline going from left to right, and then you have a bunch of different tracks where you can basically modify data to change what's happening in your scene. And we can hook up a lot of cool stuff with it. We can turn game objects on and off. We can execute custom code. We can play animations, we can trigger cameras, play audio, all kinds of stuff. Basically anything you want to do, you can achieve with Timeline. So we're going to set up a couple little cinematics for one of our levels. And we're actually going to use Cinemachine in tandem with that. So Cinemachine has some really cool features for setting up things like dolly cams that will actually go along a track. And we're going to use that with our cutscene to do sort of a little fly through of our level to start. And then we'll set up a system to basically when the player gets to a certain point, we'll trigger another animation with the camera, and we'll play some animations on the character. And we can play around with some audio and moving objects around the scene too. So I just want to double check before we start. Has everyone managed to open up the project?
Loading.
Are we supposed to just drag it into Unity?
Oh, so just to cover that. So once you extract it into a folder, all you have to do in the hub is hit add and navigate to the folder. It's an entire project. So this is my folder here. Just go there and hit select folder and you'll add it to the hub, and then you can click on it and it'll open the project.
Okay.
You can start if I'm the only one who is still loading.
Okay. We'll just
I'm
wait a minute.
opening it.
Mine's loading too.
All right. We're not in a huge rush. Today's class is supposed to be kind of chill and easy. We're going to goof around a little bit. I'm hoping this stuff can help you guys in your team projects if you want to add some cinematics or a little bit of kind of polish. It doesn't really take all that long to set up like a nice little camera that can, you know, start at one point and kind of move down to your character to help kind of kick off a level and show off the art you guys have. And you can do it basically in, you know, either 2.5D project, a first-person project, whatever you want.
I'm good.
Apologize if you can hear stuff in the background. The grounds crew is outside my place right now, weed whacking, and
Yes, how dare you?
yeah. Oh, our Stratus has so many complaints about it. They'll be
About the
working-
grounds people
Yeah,
or about
the grounds people working at 2 p.m. Can you believe that? The middle of the day, they're making noise.
I get it at like 7 a.m. because I don't
Yeah.
like being woken up by weed
Yeah.
whackers at 7 a.m. But
Yeah, we get a lot of
once
weird
it's
complaints.
afternoon,
I know, yeah, you figure most people are probably up.
well, it's not even that. Like I get it. Like I used to work mornings, and by mornings I mean like 5 a.m.s, right?
Mhm.
So in the afternoon, I'd often take a nap, and if people were being super noisy, I'd get annoyed. But at the same time, I'm aware that I work mornings and everybody
Right.
else does not, right?
Yeah.
A normal day is 9 to 5. So if you have work you have to do on a yard or whatever, people are just doing their jobs.
Yeah. People will always complain.
Got nothing better to do, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Is it still opening for some people? We're good? Okay.
It's about 2/3 or 1/3 of the way there. It's taking its time.
Okay. So I'm just going to talk about what we're going to set up first then. When you get it open, I want you to go into the scenes folder and open up the side scroller scene. And what we're going to do here is we're going to throw in a character, and we are going to basically set up a side scrolling camera. We're going to use a world offset. So if our character is running along the surface here, I think I have the weed whackers just trying to get as close to my window as possible. We're going to set up a camera that's going to follow from this direction, and we can play a lot around with a lot of the cool settings that Cinemachine has. So Cinemachine has a straight 2D camera you can set up that will follow sort of like a pixel art type game. But if you're doing 2.5D, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with having the camera kind of lead the character a little bit as he moves, or have a lot of stuff you would sort of expect out of a third person or first person game you can do in Cinemachine. So you could have even like screen shake affect your game. You know, if stuff's falling down, you can shake your camera in a 2.5D scene and get all those kind of cool effects out of it. And one of the really cool things I want to show you with a 2.5D camera in particular is you can set up confines for a camera, which is really cool. So we can basically draw with a collider exactly where we want the camera to be able to go in our scene. So if the player, you know, runs all the way to the left side of our scene, say, and we don't want them seeing like outside the bounds of our level, we just want to kind of end all the level art there, we can define that the camera can't go far enough to see that stuff. And we can also play around with kind of how much we want the camera to move up and down when we jump. Because, you know, most platformers, you don't have the camera moving one-to-one when the player jumps up and down. You might have it move a little bit, but if it's completely stuck to the player, it's going to be kind of weird, especially if you jump and suddenly the ground's gone underneath the player. So we can kind of tune all that stuff to get the camera we want. Okay, Amy, how's yours looking for opening?
Good timing, it just finished.
Perfect. Okay, so go into scenes and open up that side scroller scene, and we should be good to go. The other thing I want to show you guys in this project is if you go to the prefabs folder, I have the character and the controller set up already. And I just wanted to show you guys kind of with proper scripting, we're actually going to be using the same character prefab with no adjustments for each one of our games. All we're doing is changing how the player controller sends information to the character. And we don't need to have a separate 2D, 3D first-person character. It's all the same. So to get started in our side scroller level here, I'm going to grab my character and I'm going to drag him into our scene. And the way I designed this level, if we put the character at 0, 0, 0 for position, he's going to be standing right in the middle of this platform. And our controller is going to take care of the rotation of our character, but just so it doesn't look weird, I'm going to set his Y rotation to 90, so he's facing the correct direction. The way this character is built is actually a very, very similar script to what we wrote in the second class of Unity 2 earlier this week. If we hit play now, the character is just going to start animating. He's going to sit there and do nothing. He's not receiving any input, so nothing's going on with him. To get him moving around, there is another prefab in the prefabs folder here called the side scroller controller. So I'm going to drag that into the scene as well. And on its own, it's not hooked up to anything, so it's not going to do much. We just need to take our character and drop it into this movement section on the side scroller controller. So I'm going to drop that in there, and we can hit play. And I can use S and D to move my character back and forth. Of course, we don't have a camera hooked up right now, so I'm able to, just jump off the map and bye-bye character. Does anyone have any issue getting their character moving around? No?
Sorry, where were you attaching the side scroller?
So when we have the controller and the character in the level,
Okay.
you just need to drag the character into this slot here, the movement slot on the side scroller controller.
Cool.
So that basically hooks them together, and the controller is going to send input to the character.
Awesome.
That should have them running around, and if you have a controller handy, it'll also run around with a controller.
I have some errors with the scripts for some reason.
Oh, what does it say?
Okay. So on the console it says input value could not be found. So that, yeah, it says 40. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yeah.
Oh, could you approve the
Oh,
screen?
yeah. I hate that default. It's always, I have to stop sharing too. Stop share, allow multiple, and I can share my screen again. And then it closes all my windows on me. Oh my God, Zoom. And it moves us back over here. It resets my entire UI
Wow.
when I enable that. Okay, there we go. You should be able to share now.
Okay. So yeah, I have this error.
Input value namespace.
I think.
Input value. Can you left click on first person controller once?
Oh, it shouldn't be the first person. Oh, I guess you're just looking at the prefab there.
Oh, can you not have the right click there? I was trying to read what's actually showing. Thank you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It's just using the input system. A second, I can't. I'm going to move this over here. What happens if you hit clear?
Clear?
Yeah,
Well, it's
just
like
in the console.
console, okay.
Go back to
Oh.
the scene.
Did you
you-
open? Did you open the project or did you import this stuff?
I imported it.
Oh, okay, yeah, no,
Oh.
you need to open the entire project. That will not work.
Oh, okay. But
Actually, we could.
Just bring in the package. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, go to Window. Up at the top.
up at the top window, yep.
Go to Package Manager.
Page manager.
So we just need to install some stuff here. So go and find, we'll go to Input System. Where is it? Input System, yeah. Go there, hit Install.
Mhm.
When it pops up, just hit No for now.
Okay. And what else do I need to install?
You'll need the Input System. You'll also need Cinemachine. Just hit No.
Cinemachine's already a green check mark.
Oh, Cinemachine's already in? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, recompiling. There we go. Your errors are gone. You'll also need Pro Builder.
Builder, yes. I
Already
have it.
in.
Oh, okay. You actually don't need ProGrid, so we can skip that. Let me see. That should be it.
Okay.
So go to, oh, you've got the scene open. Okay, so your Pro stuff is there. Okay, hit back on this prefab.
Okay.
Yeah. So drag in the character out of the prefabs folder. Throw them in your scene. Yeah, I put them at 0, 0, 0. And then drag in the side scroller controller.
Oh, okay.
Just into the hierarchy. So it's in the
okay.
scene. Yeah. Okay, and now you see the movement, none character movement. Just drag your character onto there.
Okay.
No, down below on the side scroller controller. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, now try hitting play and you should be able to run back and forth. Oh, right. Sorry, we need to turn that on for a sec. Go to edit and go to project settings. And then go to player. This is the part I told you to hit no on when we set up the input. Scroll down to the bottom. You'll see the input manager old under active input handling near the top.
Up just a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, see that? Just go input. Yeah, just go both. Both works. So there you go.
Oh.
Okay, so it's just going to restart Unity and then you should be good to go.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. How do I exit from watching your screen share? Oh, that works. Okay, cool. So we should be good to go now. So our next step is to set up a Cinemachine camera to follow around our character. Now, you'll notice when you go up to the Cinemachine section, there's a lot of different stuff we can create. I'd say 80% of the time I'm creating a Cinemachine camera, I am just creating a standard virtual camera. Most of these other ones aren't really separate components. They are just kind of default configurations for certain types. To go through them really quick, a virtual camera is just a standard, you can do anything with this camera. The free look camera is basically a third-person camera. So it's basically set up to follow around a character, and you can move it up and down and rotate around the character, like the one we created in our Unity 2 class. Blendless cameras are a way to basically blend between different cameras based on an input. Braden, I'm not sure if you've used that. I haven't actually ever used a blendless camera for anything.
No, I've only ever used blended.
Yeah. So what I use instead of a blend list, which is more powerful, I use a state-driven camera. So a state-driven camera is super cool. We're going to play with this later. We can hook up a series of cameras to an animator, just like how we animate a character, but basically a dummy animator that doesn't do anything. And we can switch between different cameras based on that animator state. So we can do stuff like if you wanted to have a maybe switch. Oh, a good example. If you guys have played Overwatch, some of the characters like Reinhardt will go from a first to a third person perspective, like when you open up his shield. You could have one camera that's first person following Reinhardt, and then have a third person camera, and based on a state, you could switch back and forth between the two, and it makes it super easy. And it doesn't do like a snap from one position to another. It actually basically translates the camera over time between the two, which is really cool. So you don't have any really jarring switches between cameras. Clear shot camera, some of these clear shot camera and mixing cameras, I haven't played around with a whole lot. Some of Cinemachine is geared towards basically real-time, basically movie and TV show production. Unity's actually been used on a couple different TV shows now. The advantage of doing it in Unity, or Unreal is actually pushing pretty hard for this right now, is rather than the typical workflow of a studio produces all their assets and puts together the animations, then they send it to a render farm. They have to wait, days or weeks to get the final version back and then check it out. If you're doing it in engine, you can basically, in the middle of a shot, alter camera positions, and the director can go in and mess with stuff. So they're kind of pushing towards Unity being used for that as well. The one thing I do use sort of from the TV and movie side is the dolly camera system. We'll be playing with that later. So we can set up a track for a camera to follow, basically in an animation. Target group cameras are really cool. So a target group camera is really useful for, I'd say mainly top-down games. So if you were doing a kind of type of brawler game or maybe like a Diablo game with multiple characters, rather than having the camera follow a single particular character, for example, in like a local multiplayer scenario, you can have a target group set up and have all your players in that target group, and then you can define how the camera will follow the group of players rather than a single player. You can actually have it zoom in and out to make sure it always has all of the characters in your list in view. And finally, the 2D camera down at the very bottom is for basically pixel perfect sprite type cameras. If you're doing like an old school 2D game with no 3D or perspective to it, you can use that for just 2D stuff. So what we're going to create for this one is the kind of bog standard virtual camera up at the very top. So just go Cinemachine, create virtual camera. Now you'll notice our camera immediately moves. So this actually did a couple things. It created a new object in our scene here, a Cinemachine virtual camera, and it also added a component to our main camera. The really cool thing about Cinemachine is that it uses these virtual cameras. So rather than creating a whole bunch of different cameras in your scene, which people would do previously, we basically have a single camera that gets moved around by the Cinemachine system. So rather than having to manage all these individual cameras and their post-processing and all that kind of stuff, we just have a single camera and then we move it around based on input from Cinemachine.
Is that the same case even if you have like split screen?
If you have split screen, you still will need multiple cameras, yes. Now, the virtual cameras basically define where our camera is going to be sitting and where it's going to be looking. In the case of a simple system like this, when we only have one virtual camera, it's basically one-to-one all the time. Our main camera is always going to be where the virtual camera is and looking in the same direction. If we have something where we're blending between multiple cameras, the camera will be moving between the virtual cameras in our scene. So there are basically four main things that are part of the Cinemachine cameras. We have a follow, which is the object that our camera is going to be following. We have the look at, which is what our camera is going to be looking at. Both of these can be optional if you don't want it moving or if you don't need it looking at a particular object. And then if you scroll down, we have the two main configurable areas, which are the body and the aim. So the body describes basically additional processing on where you want the camera to be sitting. And the aim is the same for the look. So we can basically add further configuration to what our characters or what our camera is going to be looking at. So we could do stuff like with target groups, we could have our player character in the world. And then if maybe you're playing like a Dark Souls type game or like a third-person action game and you target like another enemy in the scene, you can add that enemy to your basically a list of stuff you're looking at, and the aim will actually move the camera so you can see both of them. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with Cinemachine. Our 2.5D camera here is going to be pretty simple. Let's start with our position. So all we have to do here on our virtual camera is put something in the follow to start. You can actually see there's a warning here that we need a follow target to work with the body, and we need a look at target to work with the aim system. So I'm just going to drag my character into the follow. And you'll see our virtual camera moved immediately. So it's now using this information from the body to determine where the virtual camera is sitting. Now, what it's set to default here is lock to target with a world up. This kind of sounds like what we want, except lock to target doesn't really say it in the name. It follows the rotation of the player. So as an example, my character here, if I rotate it, you can actually see the virtual camera always stays behind my character. So this is good if you're going to be following the character in like a third-person style game. But obviously in a side scroller, this is a bit weird, particularly if we do something like we set it up to follow the side of the character. Seems like a good idea until our character rotates the other direction and our camera moves around to the other side of the scene, which is going to get real confusing. So we're going to play around with the body here. So the first option, if we go to the transposer, it has a bunch of different options for how we want the body to work. Transposer is basically a simple follow a target. There's also options for a third-person follow, which lets you do kind of over-the-shoulder style, kind of third-person shooter type stuff. Oops. There's also a framing transposer, which is cool. We can basically tell it to look at a certain position, but with certain limits. So if you're doing like a Resident Evil style, like security cam following the player, you can basically set it up so it will follow the player around a room once they reach like the edges of the camera. Hard lock to target is literally just going to be wherever that target is, that is where the camera is going to be. Orbital will let you basically orbit in a circle around the player based on an input. So you can actually, let me adjust this. No, it won't for some reason. But basically, if you want a camera just to circle around an object, you can use orbital. Tracked dolly will let us move along a dolly, and we're going to use that later. Transposer is the one we want to be using. And for the binding mode, we have a bunch of different options here. I'm going to set it to world space. So we're going to use a basically world space offset to determine where this camera is. So we could adjust, once we have it set to transposer and world space, we can adjust where we want it to sit on the x-axis in regards to our player. So if we want it to lead the player, if we're always going to be moving in the right direction, we could have it lead and be kind of in front of the player if we want them to see more in front. The y-axis will let us move up and down. Obviously, this is kind of low. I don't want a completely side shot, so I'm going to raise it to something like maybe 1.5. And the Z is going to be where it sits on the Z axis, so how close we are to our player. So I'm going to adjust the Z, zoom in a little bit so we get a better view to maybe -6. Looks okay. You notice our aim is still a little bit weird. We're not really looking at the player. So we can set up our aim component next. So on the aim, we need to plug in a look at to get our aim system working. Because right now we have actually no original basis for where we're going to be aiming our camera. You could, if you wanted to, for a side scroller, you could go aim, do nothing. And, oh, sorry. Sorry, big git emergency.
What's up?
Anne Friesen from the 57s just messaged me saying that apparently her repo is gone in Gitkraken. Would you mind going to help her?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just trying to picture what could cause that.
I have no idea.
My
Well, she
brain
said
is breaking.
most of it is gone, so I don't know what that means.
Someone rebase?
I don't know.
I'll see if I can get a hold of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, back to Cinemachine. In a simple 2D system, we could just set our aim to do nothing, in which case we could manually set our camera and our angle. When we have it set to some sort of composer, we can't basically manually adjust the angle. The composer will take over it, but while we're in do nothing mode, we can go in and say, lower our camera by like 15 degrees. Make some adjustments to the height of our camera, maybe. And we can test that. That creates a pretty simple follow cam in a kind of 2D or 2.5D type scenario. if you wanted to get a little bit fancier and have a little bit movement on your camera, we could plug in our character again into the look at field on our Cinemachine virtual camera here. So we have our character plugged in for both our follow and our look at, and we could change our aim to a composer. So this will allow a little bit of movement and rotation in the camera. So if I hit play now, you'll notice when we move left and right, my camera will actually kind of aim at the player, but have a little bit of a delay on it, which kind of adds kind of a cool effect. Depending on your game, this might be good, might be bad. I think it looks kind of cool. Now, one of the really powerful things about Cinemachine is we hit escape to unlock our cursor here. Cinemachine actually kind of breaks the usual Unity convention, and you'll see at the top, by default, it has this thing that says save during play checked off. So we can play our game and tune our camera, and when we stop playing, it's gonna save all the values we set up. So if we wanna go in and adjust things, if we're using our world space transposer here, we can adjust the height of the camera. 2.5 looks okay. We could adjust our follow offset a little bit. Go to like -8 to zoom out a bit. And we can do things like mess around with the damping. So you'll notice there's a little bit of almost kind of interpolation on the movement of the camera. If we wanted to minimize that, we could adjust the X, Y, and Z damping down to 0, and it will be more kind of stuck to the character. Kind of depends how you want your game to feel. The more damping you add, if I crank it up to like 20, the more of an ease you're gonna get there.
What's the red that it's showing on the camera? Does that have a
so
purpose?
that's a good question. We'll get to that in a second.
Cool.
So I'm gonna stick with the original damping of 111. So in the composer, we can play with a lot of stuff. You'll see on our screen here, it's giving us, just what you're asking about, a bit of a debug visual of how our Cinemachine camera is working. The yellow dot here is exactly what our camera's looking at. We might not want it staring at our character's feet. That's a little bit weird. So we can adjust the tracked object offset here. So if we want to look more up and, wait, why is X doing that? I'm very confused why X and Z are swapped. It might be using the local direction of our player. Oh, it is. That's a little bit weird. I think I'm going to keep those set to 0. But we can adjust the Y value to maybe like 1, so it's in the center of our character, and we're looking kind of at our character's stomach rather than staring at our character's feet. There's also some options. I'm not sure how well it's going to work in a side scroller, but there is an option to have a look ahead time. If we crank that all the way up, oh yeah, there we go. You can see it kick in. So look ahead time I find is really good for games where you don't have a lot of visible space, but you kind of need to see ahead of the player. For things like if you're making say a clone of the original Grand Theft Auto games, which were all top down, the faster you go in a vehicle in Grand Theft Auto, the more the camera would look ahead just so you don't crash into stuff. You could set up your look ahead time to do something similar. In a side scroller, that feels a little bit weird. There's also damping settings, just like on the body, so we can damp the aim. The more we crank up the damping, basically the slower it's going to be to look at our player. If we have it set to 0, it's going to instantly basically lock onto our player. Leave that a default. Now, screen X and Z, we can basically adjust where our position is in the relative to the center of the screen. If we want to look in a particular direction. The rest of the stuff kind of refers to the dead zone. So we have a dead zone in the middle of the screen, as well as a soft zone. So the dead zone we can set up. It might be hard to see over Zoom. But the dead zone will allow us to do things like every time I jump, the camera moves up and down a lot, which I'm not a big fan of. If we want to prevent that, we can crank up the dead zone to maybe like 0.5. And our camera's not going to move as much when we jump up and down. It'll allow our character to move around a bit more before the camera starts to look after wherever the player went. Did everything go okay with Anne?
Yeah, her computer crashed while Git Kraken was open, and it basically broke the .git folder. It's just a recloning.
Oh, that sucks.
She's good to go. I was terrified it was something worse, but no, she's fine.
Yeah. All right. If we have a dead zone width and height of 0.5, you can see it'll kind of let my character head towards the edges of our dead zone before moving a lot. And the soft zone is basically similar to that, where it's going to try and make sure at that point, I don't know where the default was, but I have it set at 0.8. It's going to not allow anything my character's looking at to go outside of that soft zone. So basically the red zone there is sort of a no-go zone for the look system. Why my dead zone's kicking in so quickly. I don't really play around with these a whole lot, but these options down at the bottom adjust the bias, so we can basically move the soft zone around the dead zone. I haven't really found a good use for that, though.
Actually, Quinn, my screen doesn't look like that. Just the same with the body camera like that.
Do you have the virtual camera selected? If you click off of the virtual camera, or click on any other object, it's going to hide this display.
I don't see the red and the screen.
But your virtual camera is definitely selected.
How to select that? Actually?
So just clicking on the virtual camera in the hierarchy. Can you share your screen?
Yes.
Oh, you don't have a look at target selected. So take your character and drag it, just like we did with the follow. Drag your character into the look at.
Just right here?
No, up near the top. You see underneath follow? See it says look at? Yeah, you need to plug it in there.
That one too.
There you go. Okay, so now tracked offset Y I have set to 1. There we go. So now it kind of looks like mine.
Thank you.
Yep. So if you hit play now, it should be looking at your player.
Yes.
So one really cool feature that's particular to 2D cameras, as I mentioned, is the ability to block the camera from entering certain areas on your screen. So we can go and add extensions to our camera. So it's kind of interesting. Extensions are kind of like a component for a component in Cinemachine terms. On any Cinemachine camera, if you go down to the bottom, you'll see this extensions with a little drop down that says add extension. If we click that, we can see all of the extensions that are available. A lot of them are geared towards basically making small changes to the camera after all of the processing from the body and aim happen. So you can add like a Cinemachine offset or the recomposer to make adjustments after the fact. We'll play around with some other stuff here later on. For now, let's go and add the Cinemachine confiner component. So the confiner component will allow us to force the camera into certain areas in our scene. And you'll see it's kind of interesting. It's looking for a bounding shape 2D. It's basically just a 2D physics collider. We can put that on, if we're working in a purely 2D game, we can put that on another layer so our player doesn't bump into it or anything. Luckily, if we're working in 3D, our 3D stuff isn't going to interact with 2D colliders, so we don't need to worry about any of that. So we can either add a simple 2D box collider. You could do like a, I don't know, circle collider or something, but the most powerful form is adding a polygon collider. So I'm gonna go up here and hit the plus button. Actually, can we make a polygon collider? No, we can't. We'll just create an empty game object. And I'm gonna call this the camera confines. And just because I'm nitpicky, I'm gonna put it at 0, 0, 0. It's going to sit there, and I'm going to add a component, and I'm going to put a polygon collider 2D on it. You can actually see, it might be a little bit hard to see on Zoom, but it's created a little pentagon around the object there where my collider is sitting. The easiest way to edit this is to go up at the top of your scene view here. We have the 2D button. I'm going to hit that to switch to 2D mode. So now we're looking at our scene in purely 2D. And with our collider here selected, I'm going to hit the Edit Collider button. And this is going to allow us to move points around and add new points. So if we're looking at our pentagon here, if I point at a corner, you'll see the little handle here changes from like a green square to sort of a yellowish square. I can then drag points of my collider around. So I can kind of do this. Make a box. Oh, I've added a new corner there, which is all right. If we want to add a new corner, all we have to do is point at one of the edges and click and drag out. Doing this, we can basically create a collider I'm just gonna drag it all the way over here that we can kind of fit around our level. We'll do this just so we can't go right off the edge. Kind of like that. If you've accidentally done something like this, and one of your edges is super messed up, that's going to make for a pretty weird camera. If you hold down Control, it goes into the delete mode, and we can delete segments. So if I delete that, it's going to connect those. If I delete that, it'll connect there. I can kind of fix it up that way. But for the most part, for using these colliders for a camera system, it doesn't have to be all that perfect. Players aren't going to really notice if, the lines aren't perfectly straight and lined up correctly. So the next step is on our virtual camera here. We just need to plug our 2D physics collider into the bounding shape 2D section. You'll notice my camera must have been slightly outside of the collider here because it actually moved a little bit. And now when I hit play, if I run around, you can see when I get to the edge of my platform here, my camera actually stops moving with me. It hits the edge, the corner here of the confines. If I go left, I've got it so it goes up the ramp, so it'll move up there. Probably a little bit too confining here. And if I jump over this block, my camera is not going to move up a whole lot because I've got it confined to there. If I didn't have the confine, it would move up a lot with my character, which might look kind of weird. Do that, and then jump over here. And over on this side, I've got the same thing set up. So you can see my camera is hitting the edge of my confines there. So this is really powerful for adding some nice kind of polish to your camera to make sure you're not looking at stuff you don't want to be looking at. And I never really would have thought about it, but doing it with a 2D collider like this makes for a pretty cool and easy to use implementation for kind of confining your camera in a certain space.
But if you go like really outside it, it will still follow you.
It shouldn't. Like if I jump off the edge?
Yeah.
Oh, so sorry, that is a good point. So what's happening is this confiner works on the body, not on the aim. So we have the aim that's going to be constantly looking at our player. If we wanted to totally prevent that, we could just turn the composer off, switch it to do nothing. And if I jump off the edge now, it's going to hit the confines and stop.
I don't think mine is confining.
Okay.
Oh, I might have messed something else up. Let me look.
Do you share your screen?
Yeah, sorry, it keeps freezing. It's having a very hard time.
Oh, okay.
And it keeps changing stuff. It's just gonna try this and see if that makes it work first.
Okay.
Oh, maybe it is. I might have just put it too far over.
It takes a little bit of tuning.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Cool. So there's some other cool stuff we can add to Cinemachine. One of the big ones why I like to get students to use Cinemachine is because it has a screen shake system built in. So to get it working, we need to tell which virtual cameras can listen to a screen shake. So on the Cinemachine confiner, sorry, underneath the Cinemachine confiner, we're going to be adding another extension. So on add extension, I'm going to hit the button again, and I'm going to add a Cinemachine impulse listener. There isn't a whole lot to adjust here. There are different channel masks for impulses, so you could mask off different cameras will listen to different impulses. Use 2D distance is useful for 2D cameras. And then the gain we can use to crank up basically how much screen shake this particular camera is going to be listening to. I would recommend just setting that to 1 on all of them so you don't have one particular camera that shakes more than the others, but you could adjust that manually. Cinemachine luckily has some simple components set up to trigger screen shakes for us. You can do the entire thing through script if you want, but they have some handy components to kick off screen shakes. So we can actually use Pro Builder to create a trigger really quickly. If you don't have the Pro Builder window open, you can just go.
It gives me a stack error.
Sorry?
It gives me a stack error.
Oh, what, adding the.
Yeah.
Really? That's weird.
Stack empty.
Stack empty. I haven't seen that before. Did it add the listener?
I'm on the default channel.
Okay, so you have the listener attached?
Yeah, I have that.
Okay, we should be okay then. So we can go to Tools, Pro Builder, and open the Pro Builder window. And I'm just going to add a new shape here. by hitting the plus button. Oh, it's set to cylinder right now. I'm gonna change that to cube. We'll make a big cube. I'm gonna make it 2 by 2 by 2, so my player definitely can't run past it. And then I'm gonna hit build. That's gonna add the cube to my hierarchy here. And I'm gonna use the handy Pro Builder system. So with the cube selected, I'm gonna hit the set trigger button. And that's going to turn it into a trigger. So I'm able to move it around now.
Quinn, sorry, really quickly, what was, I can't find that thing that needed to go on the camera.
Oh. So down at the bottom where it says extensions, see that? Hit add extension and click on the Cinemachine impulse listener.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. And then I just added just to do this again. So I open the Pro Builder window by going Tools, Pro Builder window. I hit the plus button by new shape to make sure I was selecting a cube. Position that somewhere on my scene here, so the player's going to walk through it. Hit build. And then I hit the set trigger button. So the Pro Builder triggers aren't really any different than usual Unity triggers, other than it has some nice functionality for displaying the trigger. So it automatically sets up sort of a transparent material for us. And it has this really cool feature where I can see it in the scene here with the transparent material, and I can also see it in the play window. But as soon as I hit play, it actually hides itself automatically. So I find it's easier to use for sort of level design stuff than setting up a trigger ourselves because of those added functions. And then on the, I'm going to rename this just so I can keep track of it. I'll call this the screen shake trigger. There are two different impulse components we can use from Cinemachine. One basically lets us define an impulse and then call it through code when we want. The other one listens for either a on trigger enter or an on collision enter and then plays a screen shake. So if you have something that's physically hitting the player and you want it to screen shake, you could add it there. Or in our case, we want a trigger. Maybe, I don't know, you walk into this trigger and like part of the level falls away and you do a screen shake to kind of sell it. We can add if I just search for impulse, I'll find it. We want to add a Cinemachine collision impulse source directly onto that trigger we created. This has a lot of different options. The most important one is to create a signal asset for it. So Cinemachine has a whole bunch of different signal source assets basically created, just presets we can use. You can create your own if you want. Some of them mimic particular like camera styles. So you can actually add noise to cameras, which we might play with later. So if you want to do like a cool like shaky cam, someone filming the player from afar where it's like zooming in and out and kind of like wobbling a bit, you can do that. In our case, under the signal shape here in the collision impulse source, right beside raw signal, we can either create an asset and plug it in, or more easily, we can hit this little cog and go to presets. And I really like the 6-dimensional shake, 6D shake. It's basically going to shake in all directions. The other ones are more geared towards, like I mentioned, adding that kind of shaky cam look to your camera. This one, it just kind of shakes like crazy in all directions. And once we add that, we can actually go in we should be able to walk into it and see some screen shake. Now, I always find whenever I'm testing stuff, I always like to take it to the extreme to make sure it's working. You can see there's a little bit of a bump, but it's not even that noticeable. We can crank up the amplitude and the frequency to 10. Oops. See how much screen shake we're getting. So the amplitude gain is how much it's going to shake kind of in different directions. The frequency is how fast it's going to shake. If you have high amplitude with low frequency, it's going to do this. If you have both cranked up, it's going to do this. So both those at 10, I can walk into it, and that's pretty noticeable. The other options here, basically we can adjust how much the screen shake sort of builds over time and then decays at the end, as well as how long it lasts. So the sustain time is currently 0.2. If I crank that up to like 2 and walk into it, you're going to notice a longer screen shake. That's pretty noticeable. So these attack and decay things are actually animation curves, which we haven't played with yet. There are a whole bunch of presets down at the bottom you can play with, basically how much of the gain is applied over time. So you could have a screen shake that starts off really heavy and then sort of decays over time. You could have one that sort of builds like an explosion coming towards you. There's a lot of different options there for using different curves. Kind of like that. So this is gonna build it first. And I'm not sure if you guys have the same presets I have. I've probably added some. We could have it also decay at the end. You can actually just double click on these graphs to move points around and kind of fine tune how your attack and decay work. And oh, you can also adjust the duration of them. So if you want it to really build slowly like this, I can set the attack to 2 seconds. And if I wanted to stop very suddenly, I could change the decay to like 0.1. So that sort of builds over time, gets crazy, and then just stops. Now, one thing that's really cool, this is actually kind of new and I haven't played with it much, but we can adjust the impact radius. Basically, the impact radius, anyone within right now 100 meters is going to get the full screen shake. Past that is going to dissipate down to 1 kilometer. So if you're really far away, you're going to get less screen shake. And one of the really cool things they added is the propagation speed. So if you want to do like a big open world and have like a big explosion in the distance, you can set it up so you can have the screen shake start really far away. And based on the propagation speed, it's going to take a certain amount of time for the screen shake to get to the player. So you could have people close to like the epicenter of an explosion get hit with the screen shake before people that are further away get hit by it, which is really cool. I'm not sure how much players would really notice that, but it's a cool effect. Okay, so we'll play around with some of the other Cinemachine features in our other example scenes. For now, let's go on a break until, let's say, 10:15. I'll stick around if anyone has any questions or something isn't working on your end. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in a little bit where we will continue with our, I think we'll do our first person setup next. Okay, I'll be back in 10 minutes. Okay, wait for everyone to get back, and then we will take a look at our first-person controller.
Back. I don't know about anyone else.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah, let's
give
do
them
it.
a minute.
Yes.
So my plan is we'll spend a lot of time on the side scroller. We'll go quicker on the first person and third person cameras because we showed a lot of the Cinemachine features already. And then we'll get at least like a good hour in the timeline system, working with both Cinemachine and the timeline system. Okay, so to get our first person characters set up and working, what we need to do is drag a couple more prefabs into our scene. So the first person character is going to use the same character we had and the first person controller. So I'll drag the character into my scene here. It's less important where the character is this time. And then I'm going to drag the first person controller into my scene.
Are we making an entirely new one?
Yeah, so if you go into the scenes folder,
Mhm.
you'll find the first person scene. We'll do it in there. And then all I did was drag in the character and the first person controller. So the first person controller is a little bit more advanced than the side scroller one. It needs a couple extra references since it's going to be controlling our Cinemachine virtual camera, the character movement, and it also needs a reference to the actual camera so we can get the bearing of our camera. So we're going to be hooking up all of those three things. But first, let's hook up our Cinemachine virtual camera. So I'm going to go up to Cinemachine, and we're going to create another virtual camera. Which is currently pointing backwards. We will fix that. So this one's going to be set up a little bit differently. We're still going to use a follow, but we're basically going to lock it to our character. And then for the look at, we're not going to be looking at any particular object. We're going to use the POV component for our aim rather than a composer. So in our virtual camera, I'm going to drag the the character into the follow section. Which put my virtual camera through the wall. We will fix that in a second.
What happens to me is when I do that, the virtual camera takes the pivot of the character, and it just is like in the feet.
Yeah, we'll fix that.
Okay.
So once it's following the character, under the body here, we're going to use. We don't want to use that. Let's go. We're going to set it to the transposer, and we're going to go with world space, similar to the other one. The difference here is we want our follow offset here. Basically, we want to put this inside of our character. Oh, actually, you know what? Sorry, I'm going to change that. We should use our. We'll try the simple follow with world up. Let's try that. And I'm going to try these values. So our Z's going to move basically forwards and back in relation to the character. Whoops. I want my Z to be set at, whoops. Oh, simple follows bothered me. So I keep changing my mind here. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, let's go with lock to target. So we can put it in front, because I want the camera to be slightly in front of the character, so it's not, the camera's not directly in the middle of the character. I want it kind of in the front where the eyes would be. So we can adjust it. So the Z value is at 0.25, so it's kind of in front. Maybe it's a little bit too much. Just 0.1 would be good. And we can raise the Y value until it's roughly eye height at like 1.7-ish. And I don't want it to do any weird follow kind of interpolation. So I'm going to go and set the damping values to 0. That way it's going to follow exactly where it should be in front of the character rather than doing any sort of interpolation. For the aim, rather than using a composer to look at something in particular, we're going to basically allow our camera to look wherever we want. So for aim, I'm going to change it to POV. So in the POV setting, by default, it's going to try and use the built-in input system, which we don't want. It's going to read from the mouse Y and mouse X input axes. We're going to be driving this from code through our first-person controller. So on the axis name values here, I'm just going to delete those. They should just be empty. If it's empty, Cinemachine's not going to try and use them. The other thing I like to adjust is the speed here. So by default, it's kind of set up to work like a controller. So when you give it input, it achieves a max speed of rotation in any particular direction. I find that doesn't feel very good with a mouse and keyboard type controls. So I'm going to change it from max speed to input value gain. So input value gain, rather than achieving a max speed, it basically multiplies your input by this value. We might have to adjust the 300. I can't remember if that's going to be way too fast. Okay, and the final step after setting that stuff up is I'm going to take my first-person controller and hook up the 3 objects. So I'm going to plug my character into the movement. I'm going to plug the Cinemachine virtual camera into the Cinemachine virtual camera slot. And finally, the main camera into the camera slot. When we hit play, let's see. That feels pretty good. 300 is a little fast for me. I'm an old man, so I usually have pretty low sensitivity in the games when I play them. But that doesn't feel too bad to me. One thing you might notice is that we're still rendering the character here. We can basically look down and see our own body. Depending on how you set up your game, you might want that, you might not. A lot of games, including like Unreal Tournament, which you guys have probably played around with in your level design classes, will actually have a different character rendered in third person and first person. So as you switch back and forth, it'll actually draw different hands and arms and weapons in front of your camera. For today, we're being kind of lazy, and we're just going to render our character on the camera here.
Mine showed error, and it says input axis 0 is not set up.
Oh, make sure on your virtual camera here that these input axes names are completely empty.
Oh, yep, they completely empty. Okay.
Yeah.
Not even 0. Okay.
No.
Mine's acting a bit weird too. Can I see the top part of those settings? Please and thank you.
Let's get, I can get both. There we go. Oh, I do have the follow just set to the character. And these are set up like that.
How do you get it to lock to its head?
Oh, so it's not actually attached to its head. That's actually a good question. You could do that if you wanted to, but you're going to have the animation from the character's head bobbing around added to your camera, which is a little bit weird. So what I did is I set it to lock to target, and then I just manually adjusted the follow offset until it was kind of where the character's head was. So just set the body to transposer and lock to target, and then I used Y at 1.7 and follow offset at 0.1. Or sorry, Z at 0.1. So that moves it up 1.7 units and forward 0.1 units. If you did want to try the other way, you could actually open up the character, and there's actually a bone on the head where you could attach the camera. It's a pretty cheap and simple way of adding a little bit of head bob as your character moves around, but it can cause some weird issues. Typically, you want to handle head bob yourself through the script.
It's not actually adjusting it. I don't know why.
Oh, that's odd. Is your follow hooked up?
It is.
And if you crank up your Y to something crazy, you're not noticing the camera moving?
Nope, not at all.
That's strange. Can you share your screen?
Yeah.
Let's see, lock target. Oh yeah, it should be way below that. Character 1, yeah. That's weird. That's not good. Can you, oh, your main camera doesn't have a Cinemachine brain for some reason. Can you click on your main camera? I don't know how it did that. Your main camera should have a component called the Cinemachine brain. So just hit add component.
Which one is that?
Cinemachine brain.
It's like the 8th one down
yeah,
or something, or 12 or whatever.
That works.
Scroll down on a little bit. Let me just double check the settings. That should be good. Click on your CM VCAM 2 again. Yeah, so try changing your Y to 1.7. Cool, that looks good. I don't know why it broke. I've never seen it not add that component before.
It hates me.
Yeah, basically, if your camera doesn't have this brain, it's not going to follow the virtual cameras.
That does make sense. Cool. Am I good to stop sharing?
Yes. And if you hit play, you should be able to run around in first person.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, is anyone else having issues with their first-person character? No?
No.
Cool. So we're going to skip over a lot of the stuff we've already done with Cinemachine. You can still use, I wouldn't recommend using Confiner with first person. That's going to be very weird. but you can still add screen shake and any extensions you want to a first-person camera to get the same kind of stuff out of it. And we'll add another type of extension when we work on our third-person camera. So if we're good, we can hop over to the third-person scene and set that up. So the third-person scene, you'll notice, is very similar. And we're going to go through a similar process. So in the prefabs folder is the character that we'll drag in. Same guy. As well as the third-person controller. And we also need a Cinemachine camera. So rather than creating the standard virtual camera this time, what we're going to add is a free look camera. So I'm going to go to Cinemachine and create a free look camera, the second one from the top. And you might want to double check just so it doesn't bug out like it did with Amy. Make sure your main camera, you can actually see this little icon that gets added to your object, but make sure your main camera has that Cinemachine brain attached. So the free look camera is a bit different. It has a lot more options than the standard virtual camera. And you'll notice it has these 3 rigs rather than a traditional kind of body and aim section. So the rigs, we can actually visualize them once we have it hooked up. We're going to plug our character into both the follow and the look at. And it might be kind of hard to see over Zoom here, but once you have them both plugged in, you'll see there's actually a visualization of 3 rings adjusted vertically around your character with this kind of curved line attaching them. So the way the system works is you have a bottom, middle, and top rig around your character, and you can adjust them to dictate how your camera is going to circle around your character. It gives you really, really fine control over where your camera is going to be sitting at any particular angle, which is kind of cool because you can do stuff like have the camera pull in a lot as you get below the character so you can see up more easily, and do the same thing at the top, but around the middle, you'll be further away from the character for a more traditional kind of, over-the-shoulder type view. So once we have those plugged in, we're going to do a similar process to that POV component. We're going to be driving these values through code. So I'm going to remove the input axis name from both of these, from the y-axis and the x-axis. And I'm also going to switch the speed, again, from max speed, because that doesn't feel very good with the mouse, to input value gain. And we should actually probably just hook this up and kind of see how it feels, and we can tune things from there. So once we got that set up, we have our character plugged into both of these options, and we have our input axes cleared. We can go to our third-person controller, and we're going to hook this up just like the first-person one. So I'm going to plug the character into the movement slot, the Cinemachine free look into the Cinemachine free look slot, and the main camera into the camera slot. And if we hit play, oh right, I forgot, the free look camera, by default, both of the axes, in my opinion, are inverted for some reason. I have no idea why that's the default on the free look camera. But right now with my mouse, if I move my mouse left, I'm turning right. If I move my mouse down, I'm looking up. Kind of like a weird, almost like you're controlling a plane or something. So on the free look camera, this is easy to fix. You'll notice on each axis here, our Y and X one, there's an invert checkbox. So I'm going to switch both of these. I'm going to make sure the Y axis is inverted and the X axis is not inverted. It's kind of a personal preference thing. If you prefer that inverted aim, some people actually do. I even know some people that have played first-person shooters with an inverted control, which is so weird.
I play inverted with a controller, but with a mouse, it's
So
really
with a controller, in my head, it makes more sense. Yeah, I've seen some people play with just Y-axis inverted. So if they want to shoot the top right of their screen, they move their mouse down and right.
Yeah, that's how I play.
Oh, not with a mouse though, right?
No. With the
Yeah,
mouse, it has to be where the mouse is going.
Yeah. I don't know why you would invert that. It's the weirdest thing.
It's weird even with the controller.
So controller I get because I used to play a lot of like flying games, and that's how they usually did it. And in my head, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know the old Nintendo games. I think either they defaulted or my parents just played inverted because all of the old Nintendo games I played inverted, so now it's habit.
I used to do that until I played the first Splinter Cell, and it wasn't until halfway through the game I realized you could switch the controls because it was non-inverted by default. That's when I switched over. But with the mouse, that's just strange. Okay, so is everyone's camera moving around? We can still tune it here to make it look better. Right now I'm staring at my character's feet, which is goofy. But we should be able to look up and down and left and right.
Can you just show the values of the Cinemachine camera, please?
Yeah. So I haven't adjusted any of the rig stuff yet.
Oh, okay.
I've only adjusted
the orb.
This stuff here. So the follow and look at, and then I adjusted the axes. I haven't adjusted the orbits yet either.
Oh, okay. Okay. I thought I missed something.
No.
Thanks.
So it's a good question though, leading into that. If we want to adjust how the orbits work, so you can actually see them here. We've got our bottom, middle, and top rig. We can adjust the height of them as well as the radius. So we can kind of fine tune how our camera feels. The big thing I want to adjust right now, just because we're staring at our character's feet, which is kind of weird, is if we look at each rig, unfortunately there's no way to adjust all three rigs at the same time. We have to do them each kind of individually. But we can adjust the tracked object offset, which is handy. So right now with our camera, the Y-axis at 0.5, we are looking at the middle rig. You can see our camera's halfway up there. So if we adjust the top or bottom rig, we're not actually going to notice anything. But if we go to our middle rig and adjust our Y, I can move that up, maybe like 1.5, and I'm going to look more towards my character's kind of head and shoulders. If you wanted to get like a look right above your player, you could actually set it to like 2. So that's on the middle rig. I just adjusted Y to 2. So now it's kind of over top of my character, more like a shooter. Now the interesting thing is if I adjust my camera, look up and down, it's going to go to where those other rigs are. So both the top and bottom still look at my player's feet. So we could try experimenting with a few different things here. If we were making like a third-person shooter, we might just adjust the tracked object offset Y to 2 on all of them, just to have sort of a consistent aiming point. That feels okay. But you could also adjust that offset basically based on the needs of your game. If you want to be able to look up or down a lot, you could adjust it so the top rig looks way above your character, whereas the bottom rig looks down at your player's feet.
My offset is not working, so...
Okay, so you have the offset set to 2 on all of them?
2... Yep, on the aim though.
Yeah.
Do I have to set it up somewhere else too?
So you have to do it on your bottom rig. To get the exact look I have, you have to do it on your bottom rig, your middle rig, and your top rig.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So they allow you to customize those three separately in case you want to have some really kind of complex behavior with your aim.
Now it works. Thank you.
Cool. Now, one thing that's weird with the free look camera, if you run around, you might notice strafing feels kind of weird. If I hold left and right, I actually strafe around in a circle. So the reason for that is we are basing our player's rotation on the camera. And the camera right now has some damping on it. So it doesn't follow our character one-to-one. So when we move left and right, you can actually see in my scene view up top, you can see my character's moving a lot more than my camera is. My character's kind of moving around. If we want to help fix that, on our 3 rigs where we have our X and Z damping, I'm going to adjust that to 0. So there's no damping on the body. You could have a little bit to have a little bit of easing. Oh, wait, sorry, that's... didn't help. Just a sec.
I'm having a weird thing in which when I move the mouse up, the camera goes to the character's feet for some reason.
Oh yeah, so make sure on your axis control, I set mine so the y-axis is inverted. By default, it's not inverted. And the x-axis is set to not invert.
Oh, okay, yeah, I had the X inverted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. I thought that damping should help. I'm just going to bring out my reference really quick. Figure out how I fix this.
That's okay. Can you, or will you share this project you're working on?
Yes. I keep saying I'm going to do it. I haven't done it. I'm going to do it this afternoon. I'm going to get basically a page set up to have information for this class along with copies of the projects and a link to our playlist.
Awesome. Thank
So
you.
you guys
Yeah,
have
it'll be good to have
for it.
this one.
Yeah. What did I do here to set this camera? Oh no, just a second. Oh, right. Sorry, I remember what I adjusted here. So the simple follow with world up works, but it kind of tries to stick behind our character, which causes that weird issue with our camera kind of falling behind our character, and we end up with that weird strafing around in a circle, which I don't like. So I'm going to change it from simple follow with world up over to world space. So this is under the orbits. Simple follow with world up is the default. I'm going to change it over to world space. And then we can adjust the damping for the X, Y, and Z on each rig. So if I have them all zeroed out, then it's going to eliminate that weird strafe issue. So we're stuck directly to our character now. And when we strafe, if I look down at the grid here, I can strafe right, and I'll actually run along the grid rather than strafing around in circles. So that feels a lot better. Okay, is everyone's third-person character feeling okay?
Mine's still going to, the camera is going to the feet.
Oh, can you screen share?
Sure.
It shouldn't be doing that.
Uh,
Oh, it could be your
can you see?
your offset. Yeah, so scroll down a bit on your, yeah, just scroll down in the inspector. Going, oh, so your tracked object offset there. You see that underneath the top rig? It says aim, you have the composer drop down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, leave it on composer,
Okay.
but your tracked object offset, the value right below that, it's got an X, Y, Z.
Oh, here.
Yeah, change the Y to 2. And then
Okay.
scroll down, and you'll find the same value on the middle and the bottom rig. So keep scrolling. Yeah, so change that Y1
Here?
to,
Oh, here.
oh no, that's the damping, yeah. Oh, and drag your damping down to 0 as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and change that to 2.
Also, I'm not sure if you want 0.01 on your track.
Oh yeah, make that 0.
0, okay.
And scroll down a bit more, and there's the third rig. Basically, you want to do the same. 0 the damping,
Oh, okay.
and change the Y value to 2. Okay, try that out.
Okay. Yeah, feels better.
Better?
A little bit
Cool.
too, but yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. So what we're going to do for the rest of the class is play around with the timeline system and some cinematics, so we can make this a little bit more interesting in this level. So we can use timeline to trigger a whole bunch of different stuff within Unity. We'll start off doing some animations. We'll add some audio. And then we'll look at the really weird stuff where we can call scripts on the timeline as well. So you'll end up with a whole bunch of different assets created by the timeline system. So I've actually already created it, but you should have a timeline folder in your assets just to keep track of all of the assets you'll produce. And what we're going to do is create, basically we need 2 parts for the timeline system to work. We need an object in the scene that's going to play the timeline. And we also need a timeline asset on, or basically in our assets folder. They work together to control the timeline. So to create one of these, we're going to start off, just to keep things organized. Let's create a new empty game object. And again, I'm nitpicky, so I always put everything at 0, 0, 0, but it can be kind of wherever you want. And I'm going to name this object. This part's important to keep things organized. I'm going to call it the intro cinematic. And then we're going to open up the timeline window. So I'm going to go to Window, go down to Sequencing, and then the only thing in sequencing is the timeline. So we can kind of dock this wherever we want. In the timeline system, you'll often be interacting with the scene a lot for moving things around and kind of animating stuff. So I'm going to drag the timeline down to here and dock it along with my game window, because my game window isn't super important while I'm working with the timeline.
Where's the timeline from?
So go Window, Sequencing, and click on Timeline.
Thank you.
Obviously, if you're using a different layout, you'll have to figure out where you want to put the timeline, but what's important is to have your scene view and your hierarchy and your inspector all visible along with the timeline.
With timeline, can you do things like in sequencer in which you can have, I don't know, like an object moving or floating like in game or stuff like that?
We're about to do that.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So I think what we're going to do is we're going to create a little cutscene when our level starts, and we'll have parts of our staircase here rise up out of the floor so the player can walk up it. We'll add some audio, and then we're going to have another cutscene where when we can run up the stairs and get to the top, we'll play another little event. So what I'm going to do is you'll notice when we don't have anything selected, our timeline window here says to start creating a timeline, select a game object. So basically, whatever game object we select, it's going to put the timeline component onto. So I'm going to select my intro cinematic, and then it'll show this little create button. So I'll hit create, and it wants me to save this .playable file. And it's going to name it automatically. I'm not going to change the name. Intro cinematic timeline is a good name for it. And I'm just going to make sure that it's in the assets timeline folder. You can move the stuff around afterwards, but I'm just going to put it directly in here. So I'll hit save. And that is going to do two things. So it creates an intro cinematic timeline asset, which is a .playable, which is part of a fairly big kind of scriptable object system they have in Unity. In this case, it's being used for the timeline system. But it creates that object sitting in our timeline folder. The cool thing with this is you can reuse them. If you delete the intro cinematic game object out of your scene, that's fine. You can just create another one of these playable directors and plug your timeline into there without losing any data. So it's added this playable director component to your intro cinematic. All the playable director does is take your timeline and basically have options for playing it. So I'm going to have it set to update time, or update method is on game time. You can have it do things like use unscaled game time. So if we have it set to game time, if you set the time scale of your game, say to do slow-mo, it's going to slow down your cutscene. If you have it set to unscaled, if you like slow your game down to 10% and play this timeline, it's going to play at just normal kind of real world speed. Manually lets you basically call a function to manually tick the event along. DSP clock, Brayden, have you used that? I'm not even sure what that is.
No, I've never messed with it.
I'd say for 90% of cases, you probably have this set to game time. Play on awake basically tells the playable director here that we want to play this timeline right when the scene starts. So for an intro cinematic in a level, the play on awake is a perfect option. Wrap mode will let us basically loop things if we want. We're going to have it set to none, so just wherever our timeline ends up at the end, that's where everything's going to stay. It's not going to start playing it again. We can also use initial time to sort of skip ahead in the timeline. In our case, we're going to play from the start, so we'll have it set at 0. So you'll notice the timeline window itself has changed here. What we can do is drag stuff.
Oh, I figured out what it's for.
What is
it's
it?
Basically, if you want to sync it up to audio cues and whatnot, it automatically syncs up to some audio and stuff
cool.
like that.
Interesting. We can start adding things to our timeline just by dragging stuff from our scene and from our assets. So to start this, let's grab our objects we want to move here. I think what I want to do is have basically 2 original parts to our cutscene. So I want to have this staircase and this cube here rise up out of the floor at sort of separate times and then sort of lock into place so our player can walk up the stairs. So I'm going to take the cube here. Actually, you know what? Let's do it as part of the, we'll do it as part of the timeline. So we'll leave them there just for level design purposes. They'll be their starting position. But when we play the timeline, we're basically going to snap into the floor and then raise up. So one thing I like to do when I'm working with the timeline is you'll notice if I want to add something to my timeline here by dragging it, I'll go, okay, I'll grab my cube. And I click on my cube and my timeline disappears, which is kind of annoying. I'm going to select the intro cinematic, so my timeline's visible here. And up in the top right is this little lock button. I'm going to click that. So that's going to lock the timeline I have selected. So if I click on other stuff, I don't have to worry about my timeline disappearing here, which is nice. So let's start with this first cube. With my timeline locked, what I'm going to do is take my cube, and I'm literally just going to drag it and drop it onto my timeline over on the left. And this is going to open up a window that allows us to add a track. So there are different tracks to interact with different things in the scene. The four it's showing us right now are an activation track, which will allow us to turn objects on and off. There is the animation track, which will allow us to add and play animations. There's also the audio track if we want to play sounds on an object. And then the signal track, which is more complex, we'll get to that later, will allow us to basically do a lot of different weird things, like call code on an object. What we're going to do is select the animation track. And you'll see it's actually done a couple things here. It's added our cube as a track to our timeline. And it's also added an animator component. If I scroll down, it's added an animator to my cube automatically, so it can play the animations for us. Now, one thing I want to set, I believe by default, yours will show frames. It's going to look like this. It's going to show 60, 120, 180. If you want to work in frames, that's okay. I prefer to work in seconds. In my head, that makes more sense just for timing things. So if you hit this little cog in the top right of the timeline window, you can switch it back and forth between seconds and frames. If you're coming from more of an animation background, frames might make more sense. For me, seconds works better. Just comparing them just to show you what's going on. By default,
hold on, where did you change that setting?
This cog in the top right. The timeline,
yes.
This thing right here. Yeah.
Yeah, seconds is way better.
Yeah, seconds is better. So you can also see.
I don't know why, like in sequencer, you cannot change that.
Oh, really?
You only have frames.
It's an animation thing. Yeah. And you can see by default, this plays at 60 frames per second. So it's basically geared towards a 60 FPS game. Keeping in mind that it does use keyframes. So if your game's running at a higher frame rate than that, it's going to interpolate between. It's not like your objects are going to like stutter into position just because you're running at a high frame rate.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you can also adjust the frame rate if you want. So it says film 60 is the default. You could switch to, I don't know, 24 or something like that if you wanted to do like 24 or 30, which is what a lot of animators work at for their keyframes. Okay, so the next step is we want to set up an animation with this cube. So what I'm going to do is have my cube selected. And over on the left here, you're going to see this record button. So we can record an animation using this button. It's really, really easy. So I'm going to click that button, and you'll see it actually pops up. It says recording, and this is blinking. It's pretty obvious we're in record mode. I'm going to make sure that my timeline marker here is at 0. This is our starting point. And while that's set at 0, I'm going to drag the cube down just so it's below the floor.
I don't think it added the cube to my timeline. Like I'm dragging it, but it just says animation track, and the cube doesn't have the animator.
Oh, can you screen share that? That's weird.
Yeah. Like, it just says animation track, doesn't say cube.
Oh, can you right click on the track and just go delete? We'll add it again.
Yeah.
Okay, so take your cube, just drag that. Go to animation track. That's weird. Can you click on your cube and scroll down?
It's like she's not selecting the actual object. That's what it looks like.
Strange. Can you click on your cinematics object again where you have your timeline?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Click on the cinematics object in your scene.
Oh, here.
There you go. It did add it. You can see it says non-animator. So just a sec. Hit the lock button. This one right here in the top right of your timeline window.
Oh.
You see that? It looks like a little padlock that's unlocked.
Up to the right.
In the
right.
timeline window.
Oh, in the timeline. Okay. Here.
Yeah, top right.
No, just above the year.
Yeah, the little lock.
Left.
Left.
Sure, that works too.
Here.
Oh yeah, there you go. Now it's locked.
Yeah.
So now it'll stay selected. Okay, so right click and delete that track again.
Okay.
So when you work on the timeline, you want to work on the game object that's in your scene rather than the timeline in your folder. So try dragging the cube back onto your timeline again. And hit add animation track. There you go.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so I need to be working on.
Yeah, on that. Yeah.
Okay.
And we've got a lock now, so you won't be selecting other stuff.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So the next step, I'm going to turn this off again. Actually, I'll redo mine really quick. Okay, so the next step was we're going to record our animation on our cube. So I'll hit the record button. And we're going to be adding, wherever we drag our cube, it's going to add a keyframe at this time. So I just want to make sure that my little slider here is over at 0 at the starting point, and I'm going to drag my cube down, basically below the floor. And then I'm going to drag my timeline over to, am I back on frames again? Seconds. I'm going to drag it to, I don't know, let's go 2 seconds. And then I'm going to pull my cube up. And it's going to create another set of keyframes there. You can actually see if I drag my timeline now, we can see it moving. How did I add more keyframes?
I think you released your mouse twice. I heard 2 clicks.
Oh, okay.
Should it just make one when you release it? Sorry.
Yeah.
But only if you're recording.
Yeah.
So make sure you see the red bar and the words of recording.
Yeah. When we're done, we can just hit the recording button again. If you want to test it out, you can actually just hit the play button and you'll see your animation go.
Mine is not making a keyframe when I move it.
Do you have the object? So
let's just do screen share. That'll be easiest.
yeah, 30 questions probably isn't the best approach.
Yeah.
That one's the right one, I think. Okay, so I had it below when I started.
I just see your desktop background.
Yeah.
It shows the
There we
right
go.
thing. It says that I'm sharing screen.
No, wait.
one.
Now I just see Quinn's.
Yeah.
Yeah, stop sharing.
Make sure you share your whole don't share the application. Share.
Yeah.
I did. Is that working?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay. So you're at your specific time there.
Move the object any way you want. Is that the same object as the animator?
Okay.
There it is.
Oh, do I have to move it first?
Yeah. So drag back to that time.
Okay, because this one I had
So drag that
moved it
below the
down
floor.
here. Yeah, I already did that part, so I think that's what that keyframe is for.
Yeah, and then drag that to 2 seconds.
Okay, so I have to move this first and then move this. Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
that
so
makes
now
sense.
hit the record button again and hit
It
play.
should do it. My
You see
barn
the play
is
button?
right there.
Yep, there it
Yeah.
is.
There you go, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know why the preview, if you drag this, looks super janky a lot of the time. But if you hit play, it'll play it sort of at proper speed. Cool.
Probably
So
because our
it's-
hands aren't that steady, to be honest, and the mouse is
guess.
probably going all over the place.
Yeah. So we'll continue with this after a break. It's 11:04 already. Let's take another break until 11:15, 10 minutes from now. And we'll add some more animations and we'll add some audio.
I have just a quick question.
Sure.
Is there something like in Unreal in which you have to specify that the objects need to keep the state or the animation or something like that?
Need to keep the animation. Oh, like when you're done playing?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are settings for that.
Okay.
So you can actually see when you click the track, there's some options here.
Mm-hmm.
Up at the top is apply transform offsets. I believe you can play with it there.
Okay.
If we actually hit play, it should play our animation. Yeah, so our platform comes up. I believe. Oh yeah, there we go. So I don't want that. I want transform offsets. Maybe there isn't one for the animation. I know for some of the other ones, there are ways, like if you toggle a game object on and off, you can tell it at the end of the animation which state you want it to be in. If you were just playing an animation like this, I believe just by default, it's going to keep whatever position it ends at.
Cool. Where are you getting those settings for the animation track?
Just click on the track itself.
Oh, okay.
And it's over here.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks. Awesome. Okay.
Okay, I'll be back in 9 minutes. Okay. So we can continue working on our cutscene here. So I think the next part I want to do, after we have our main cube come up, I want to do it in sort of a cascade. The main cube is going to come up, rise out of the floor like this. Boom. And then our staircase in front is going to rise up kind of slightly after. We can adjust the timing on it to get it looking the way we want. But we can have it rise up out of the floor too. So I'm going to go and do the same process we had with our cube that comes out of the floor and our staircase. So I'm going to take our stairs and we're going to drag our stairs onto our timeline. So I'm going to take it and drag stairs and add an animation track. And now we can do the same thing. So I think I want to offset it a bit. And maybe at 1 second, I'm going to have the stairs start to come up. But we need to make sure they're in the floor at the start. So I'm going to start at 0, 0 and hit record. And I'm going to drop my staircase into the floor. And oh, you know, we're going to actually be kind of smart about this. I'll drag it to 2 seconds again, and I'm going to drag my staircase up to where it should be. We'll deal with the offset later. So now when I drag this, my keyframes are slightly wonky, so they're kind of rising at different times. I'll have my 2 objects rise out of the floor there. When I'm happy with that, I'm going to stop recording. Adjust something really quickly. I guess I'll do this in just a second. Okay, so we now have 2 animations that are kind of separate. They're not really connected to each other, but they're playing at the same time. And I want to add a bit of an offset. So we could go in and edit the keyframes to adjust them so they aren't synchronized, but that's gonna be kind of annoying, especially if we wanna go back and edit things. We're gonna be constantly moving stuff around. So there's a cool feature in this, in that we can basically hook a whole bunch of keyframes together into one section on our timeline. So on my cube, I'm gonna right click on the track and I'm gonna select Convert to Clip Track. And you can see it's gonna turn into this thing called Recorded. If I click on it, I can rename it to something a little bit more descriptive and call it like Cube Rise. So I just clicked on the clip track here, and then over in the inspector, I can rename it. And then I can go to the stairs track, right click, and select Convert to Clip Track again. And I'm going to rename this one to Stairs Rise. Now the cool part of this, once they're converted to clip tracks, I can now drag them and adjust when they start and stop. So if I want them to be offset slightly, maybe I'm going to have my stairs start halfway through the cubes coming up. I can just drag it to 1 second. I can hit play. That looks pretty cool. Did that work for everyone?
Yep.
Cool. Now, obviously, we can play our game. I hit play, and I'll see my stairs rise up. We have a couple issues that I see. First, there's no audio, so it looks kind of goofy with things just moving around. We can add some audio clips to our track in a second. The next is that if I'm fast enough, I'm gonna hit play, and I'm just gonna run forward immediately. I can end up on the stairs, which I don't think I really want. I don't want the character moving with this object right now. So we can go in and we can turn off our character's movement at the start of the cutscene and then enable it at the end of the cutscene to make sure we are just kind of watching what happens, and then afterwards we can start moving around. So on our timeline, let's start off with the audio. My weapon move? Is my character weird? Sorry, just 1 second. No, it looks okay. Okay. Where's my character crooked? Okay, weird. On my timeline, we can go and just add audio directly to it. So if we go into the audio folder, I have a couple audio files. If you click on them, you can preview them to hear them. They're kind of generic mechanical moving sounds. I think I'm gonna start with the cargo load 1 as everything starts moving, and then at the end, I'm gonna play the cargo load 3 when it kind of locks into place. So I'm just going to take the sound here and drag it onto my timeline, just like we did with an object out of our scene. Now when I hit play, we have some audio. Similar to the clips we created here, we can drag this sound to adjust exactly when it plays. I want that one to start at the start of the playing, but I'm gonna drag in the cargo load 3, and I'm gonna move this one to the end. I think that'll look good, or sound good. So it moves. And maybe I'm gonna move it a little bit sooner. Oh yeah, I like that. If you click on them individually, you can do stuff like set looping on. You can adjust their volume if they're too loud or too quiet. You can also adjust their duration. This one actually has a huge tail on the end. So I could adjust the duration to shorten it a bit if I wanted to. It probably won't sound much different. Cool. So if we hit play now, I'm going to get the full effect and play this in full screen. I like that. Let me delay the audio a tiny bit. Cool. Now we can walk up the stairs. Okay, so one thing I want to do is when we trigger this, actually, maybe we'll do this. No, we'll do that on the second cutscene. I'm okay with moving around with this stuff while this stuff's happening. We'll do as an example on the second one. So I'm pretty happy with the cinematic. That looks good. Now what we can do, obviously we don't want all of our cinematics happening right at the start when our game plays. So we can create a trigger, a volume, that will start a cinematic when our player walks into it. So I'm going to do the same thing we did earlier when we created a trigger to cause a screen shake. I'm going to go up to Tools and open up the Pro Builder window. If I hit New Shape, it's going to create the exact same shape we created last time. So if I hit that, I'll get a, oh, or maybe it's just going to create a simple box. I wasn't expecting that. We'll hit the plus button. There we go. That's going to have our last object. I'll position this in the middle of the platform. We want to kind of draw the player up here, and then we'll play a separate cutscene when we get to the top. So I'll hit build, and then convert this object to a trigger by hitting set trigger. When we play our game, we can walk into this trigger. At the top, nothing's going to happen right now because we don't have any logic hooked up to it. Okay, so my cube here, I'm going to call this call it a cinematic trigger. And I actually have a component for this called the director trigger that we'll set up in just a second because we're going to create a new timeline first. So let's go and hit the plus button and create a new empty object. And I'm going to call this the, let's call this the fly around cinematic because we're going to set up a camera that's going to do cinematic, I can spell. We're going to set up a camera that's going to do a little fly through of our level when we get to the top of this staircase. So you notice we locked our timeline here, so we need to unlock it to be able to create a new one. So that little lock button up at the top right of our timeline window, I'm going to click on that to unlock it. And then on our fly around cinematic, I'm going to hit the create button to create a new timeline. So that's going to attach the director component, create our timeline or assets, just like we did previously. I'll save that. Oh, that's for some reason going to my scripts folder now. Assets, I'm going to go into timeline and save it there alongside my intro cinematic timeline. And before I click off and select anything else, I'm just going to hit the lock button.
Sorry, so timeline can be found in which window is it?
Oh, Go window, sequencing, timeline.
Window sequencing. Okay.
And then we want to make sure that since this cinematic isn't going to be playing at the start of our little level here, we want it to play when we trigger it. I'm going to go to the playable director component here that we just created and uncheck play on awake, because we're going to play that ourselves.
Sorry, I missed something because there was a spider. I had to kill it. It was freaking me out. Sorry. The fly around cinematic, how did you make that really quickly?
So I just created a new empty game object called the fly around cinematic.
Okay.
And then same process as the previous timeline. So you'll have the timeline window open, and it'll probably still have the intro one selected like this. So uncheck the lock so you can select other timelines. And then click the fly around cinematic and hit the create button.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you.
And save that. And then the other thing we did was just lock it, because we'll be working on this one now. And on the playable director, I unchecked play on awake because we don't want this one triggering immediately.
And the cinematic trigger is just the cube made from Pro Builder and then turned into a trigger, yes?
Yes. And we're just about to add a component to it, so it will trigger our cinematic for us. It's actually a component I wrote just for you guys. It's super simple if you look at the script. All it does is on trigger enter, it has a playable director component, serialized field. It just calls the director.play. So just whatever you have hooked up to it, when you hit the trigger, it's going to play that director. So on the cinematic trigger, I'm going to add that director trigger component and just plug in my new fly around cinematic game object. So right from the scene here, just plug that in. So right now when we walk into it, nothing's going to happen since we don't have anything in our timeline. So we can start adding some stuff and they'll play when we walk into it. Okay, so what I want to set up here is I want to have our camera basically switch to we're already in third person. I want our camera to switch to an external camera and rotate around the player, kind of all around the scene, and then come back down to the player again. The way we're going to do that is we're going to use a new Cinemachine camera with a dolly track and a dolly cart. So they kind of work together. The camera is going to follow the dolly cart, and the dolly cart is going to automatically move around the dolly track to create sort of an animated camera sequence. So I'm going to go up to Cinemachine, and I'm going to go down to this option, create dolly track with cart. Oh, actually, sorry. Why is there no option to create all three? That's annoying. Okay, I don't know why. So you can create a camera, a dolly camera hooked up to a dolly track, or a dolly track with a dolly cart hooked up, but not all three of them, which is what we want. So I'm going to undo that. Or we can just delete the dolly track and dolly cart. And go Cinemachine. The first thing I'm going to select is create dolly camera with track. And that's going to create a new camera. Go to our game window, we can actually see it here. And so this camera is going to be automatically configured with this track, which you can see in the world here. It's going to place it somewhere, probably kind of at random. And we can move the camera along the track. Now we can do that through code, which works, or we can be a little bit lazy. And there's another thing. We're just going to create an empty game object here. And I'll call this the dolly cart. I'm going to add the dolly cart component, or Cinemachine dolly cart is the full name. And we want to hook that cart up to the track. So I'm just going to drag the dolly track into the path field on the Cinemachine dolly cart. And if we want to test to see if this is working, we can actually just add some speed. So I'll go speed 1. And if I hit play, that camera should move along the track. Yeah, I can see up in the scene view here, my cart is actually moving along the track. Right now, our current camera basically supersedes the new camera we've added. We're going to switch them back and forth when we need to. But that camera will move along that, with that dolly. Oh, right, sorry. Right now, if we play it, it's not going to move quite yet. We still need to tell it to use the dolly cart. So on the virtual camera that we added, it's going to be named something awful like CMVCam1. We could rename that to the, I don't know, fly around camera. We're going to tell that to use the dolly by switching the body over. So right now you see the body, it says tracked dolly. I'm going to switch that to, oh, sorry, leave that, but change the, wait, where's the option? Oh yeah, we want to turn on auto dolly down to the bottom. So I'm going to check off that auto dolly, which will basically set our dolly to follow along the track at the position closest to whatever our target is. So then we can plug in our dolly cart into the follow. I know this seems like a little bit of a rat's nest of different kind of components hooking up to each other, but that's kind of how it's designed. When we play now, you should see the camera actually moving along that track. Okay, so let's go and actually start kind of setting this up to get an idea of how the cinematic works. Is everyone with me so far? Should I repeat anything? I know that was a lot of hooking things up.
Good so far.
Okay, so we can hook this up to the timeline and then see if our cinematic is kicking in correctly or not. So let's go back to our timeline. And just like other objects, there's a specific track for Cinemachine cameras, which is cool. So I'm going to go and drag that new camera we've added. I renamed it Fly Around Camera. You might still be using the original name. I'm going to drag that onto my timeline to create a new track. And I'm going to, why is it not? Oh, right, sorry. We don't want to drag the Cinemachine camera, we want to drag our main camera onto here. Anything with a Cinemachine brain will allow us to create a Cinemachine track, which we can use to determine which Cinemachine camera is going to be rendered basically throughout our timeline. From there, we can drag our original free look camera onto our timeline. And we can also drag our new fly around camera onto our timeline. What we probably want to do is have this timeline switch to our fly around camera. Let's say the timeline will maybe, or our little cutscene will be like 3 seconds long. What I'm going to do is take our fly around camera and stretch that out to 3 seconds. And then I'm going to have my free look camera at the end, just telling it to switch back to my third person camera at the very end. And it can be a really short duration because whatever we switch to, it's basically going to stay there afterwards. So we'll switch to the fly around for 3 seconds and then just at the very end, cut back to our third person camera. We should be able to test this by hitting play. Let that cutscene go and then walk into our trigger. And it's going to cut over to my other camera and then back to my third person camera again. And it is set up so you can keep walking into it. Our cutscene is basically ended at this point. The dolly won't reset its position. But we'll cut over to that camera for the timeline.
How do you hook it up to the trigger again?
So on the trigger, I've added the director trigger component. And then you just plug the cinematic object we have in the scene into the director slot. Drag it in or just use the little picker button to select the fly around cinematic.
So it's switching without being triggered.
Oh, make sure on your fly around cinematic that play on awake is unchecked because that'll cause it to play automatically. You could turn that on for testing if you wanted to just ignore the other cutscene. We could do that to test out this second cutscene. So one thing that's happening, as I mentioned, is that when we walk into the trigger, walk up here, it starts and it's going to play. You can see the dolly moving along on the top of my screen there. It's going to keep going. When I trigger it again, it's going to cut to that other camera, but our dolly's already done moving and it's not going to reset. You might notice also if I just hit play that our dolly is going to start moving automatically. It doesn't really care that the timeline hasn't started. The dolly does its own thing. So the dolly cart object, you'll see it moves along at a certain distance, rate. We can switch basically how that works, either path units, which is a sort of, I don't know, some generic unit they use for the path, or the distance, or normally I go normalized. If I switch it to normalized, it's basically going to take whatever this, 1 divided by the speed to go along the full length. So if I want, right now our little cutscene's supposed to last for 3 seconds. I want it to last that long. I should change the speed on normalized to 0.333. And it's going to take 3 seconds to go 1 normalized distance. But we don't want it to kick off at the very start. There's actually no option to turn off play on start. What we can do is have our dolly cart just by default. I'm going to select the game object and turn it off. So it's going to be disabled in our hierarchy. if I hit play, my dolly is not going to move. My camera's going to sit exactly where it is. And then on our timeline, I'm going to drag the dolly cart onto my timeline and create an activation track. So the activation track is basically where we can tell an object to turn on or off. So this is going to be active for the 3 seconds of my cutscene. You can make it bigger or smaller. What's interesting is we can also dictate how it's going to behave after our little cutscene ends. So if I click basically on the back of the track here, we can say the post-playback state is leave as is. I'm just going to make sure that our dolly cart is set to inactive at the end. So I'm just going to change it to inactive. So when our cutscene finishes, our dolly cart will be turned off. The next time we trigger our little cutscene, it's going to turn back on, and it should start from the beginning, I believe. Let's double check. So it's going to play there. Cool. I'm going to run into it again. Oh, it's at the end. Why did it not restart? Interesting. Weird. Let me double check something. That's weird. I don't know why it's behaving like that. So that's exactly how I did it in my reference.
Let's see.
Basically, just turning the dolly cart on and off should have restarted from the beginning.
Your active track is slightly off of 0 point, I think. No,
yeah,
it's on 0.
No, I was trying to do that intentionally to see if turning it off would work. I don't know why it's behaving that way. That's weird. Let me just hit play on it.
It should come on by default.
Let me just try this really quick. Oh, no, for some reason I just never noticed that it wasn't resetting on my reference.
Oh, okay.
We could probably use a trigger to reset it, or a signal to reset it, so we could do that after. Let's just get this working first. So we have it set up so we can at least play it once. When we walk into it, it's going to play our little cutscene here, but that's kind of uninteresting, and I have no idea what it's looking at in relation to the player. So what I'm going to do on my fly around camera, I'm going to plug the player, our character, into the look at. So that camera is going to look at our character. I hit play now. I trigger that cutscene. It's going to look at my character. And I want to make this more interesting. So we can adjust the dolly track. Right now, it works on just basically a straight line. If we select the dolly track, you can actually see these extra little gizmos pop up. We have a 0 and a 1. If we click on them, we can adjust the start and end point of our dolly track. So I can do something like put 1 on one side of the staircase and 1 on the other. Maybe it goes up high in the air for some reason, like that. Now when I hit play, I start that cinematic. It's going to start behind my character and kind of swing over top. But that's a little goofy. So what we can do to make it more interesting is with the dolly track added, we can start adding more waypoints. So you can see over on the left here, we have a list of waypoints. Depending on which waypoint we have selected, it basically adds an additional waypoint after the one we currently have selected. So if I want to add a waypoint in between the two, I'm going to select waypoint 0 and hit the plus button. Then I can drag that over here. Adjust the height. Maybe 0 is going to start kind of low. And I can bring 0 over here. Do kind of a swing around up top. And then I could keep adding. If I have 2 selected, the final one on my list, and hit plus, it's going to add a third one to the end. And I can just keep adding points. Maybe my cutscene is going to do that. Created kind of a roller coaster here. Now, one thing you'll notice with our controls here is, let me reset it. So my character, once I trigger it, I can keep moving around. I can try and run out of the shot. And it's also going to be rotating my character based on where the camera is, trying to basically look in the same direction. So we can go and make sure that our character can't control itself while we're in the middle of the cutscene. So all we have to do for that is take our third-person controller and put that on our timeline with an activation track. As long as our third-person controller is disabled, we can't send any input to our character. So I'm going to add an activation track, and I'm just going to drag it. So at the last moment, we're going to set it to active again. Up until that point, it's going to be disabled. Try that out. So I can't move now. My character's locked in place. When it comes back, I have control of my character again. All I did was just drag the third-person controller on there, create an activation track, and then drag it so the activation just comes at the very end, my character being active. You could, if you wanted to, do some weird stuff like have controls turn on and off in the middle of it. If you're doing like a quick time event, you could play a little bit of like a cutscene that kicks in, then have inputs work. So, you know, the player's like mashing a button to fight someone else and then turn them off again at the end.
How would you put a delay at the end of the first camera, I guess? Because like when we play now, it like is still moving and then it jumps to the other camera and it looks kind of weird. Like, is that an easy thing to do?
Oh, just like...
So it goes like zoom and then it like doesn't even stop. Yeah.
Are you looking for a blend as well, or you just want like a flat delay?
It'd be cool if it could like go into the other camera, but I don't know if that's hard.
I think the easiest thing to do right now, I think doing a blend will be a little tricky. What we could do, honestly, is take your dolly track and add more points to it so it basically moves into the other position. It's not going to be perfect for right now. I can try and figure out a nice, easy way to do a blend at the end. Right now, the default Cinemachine track really just switches between cameras kind of instantaneously.
Can't you
My
overlap
biggest
them, though?
my biggest like thing was just, can you make it so that like it stops there on that camera and then transitions rather than just like zooming? Yeah.
Yes. So what you could do is, right now our animation basically ends at the 3-second part, or 3-second mark. I'm going to drag the activation of the other camera over here. And so the fly around cam will be turned on until like 3 seconds. Actually, no, I'll drag it to like 4. And that's where we'll put the activation of the other camera. And then I'll move my activation of my controller up to that mark 2. So it all ends at 4 seconds instead of 3. So there should move until the end, and then wait for a second, and then cut over. Yeah, there we go. So you can basically just keep moving the fly around camera there. Now, if we want to get really goofy with it, and I don't have a great example for my character interacting with anything, so I added a dance animation to the project. So what we can do to basically force characters to play particular animations, you'll notice on the animator for the character, the dance isn't hooked up. We don't actually need it hooked up to work with the timeline system. What I'm going to do is open up my character, and the actual Ybot with the animator here, I'm going to drag that onto my timeline. And I'm going to add an animation track. So we could animate sort of just manual movement of our character, but what I'm going to do is open up the art and animations folder, go to that basic shooter pack, and I'm going to drag the, open up the dance animation and drag dance onto the graph. Now it's a very long animation. It's, yeah, almost 20 seconds long. So I'm just going to shrink it. Until it ends at, we'll do the 4-second mark with everything else. So it looks like this. Go to the top of the stairs, and he starts dancing. Now, the weird thing is it ends, and my character was basically, his position moved when he was dancing. And when it starts again, my character's still in that position. Oh yeah, if you run back into the trigger, he's going to keep dancing every time. The way we can fix that little offset issue is just at the end of the animation there. I'm just going to drag our idle aim animation onto the timeline. So it basically forces them back into the idle position again. Don't know why you need a weird dancing cutscene for your third-person shooter, but we have one now.
Sorry, did you just attach the like character to the parent object?
Yeah, so I just grabbed the Ybot right here and dragged that onto the timeline. And then you can drag on the animation. So I added the dance and I just shrunk it so it doesn't go past our cutscene, or else he's going to keep dancing while you're running around in third person.
Which can be fine.
Yeah, it could be fine if that's part of your game. And then I added the idle. I dragged the idle aim back at the very end just to get him back into the idle animation so he's in the correct position when the game turns back on.
Do I just drag the animations?
So if you open them up in the folder here, you'll see this little icon, the little triangle with the lines. You can just drag those directly onto the timeline here, right onto the track.
Thank you.
So we could fix, we're right at noon. I'm gonna do this in like 2 minutes to show you guys really quick. Didn't have quite enough time to get to signals, but signals allow us to actually do things like interact with code on our scripts. So if we wanted to say, I believe I could probably reset the position. I'm gonna try this out. I haven't done it before, so we'll find out now. But I'm gonna drag the dolly cart onto here and create a signal track. And I'm gonna add a signal really quick called reset dolly. And this basically works like a Unity event. So I can go in and dolly cart. Wow, they have like no options on this thing. All right, that's not helpful. I think you'd have to custom script something. I'm surprised about that. Another example, though, I guess, would be, I'll rename this to jump. We could, if we wanted to, do something like drag our character on there. And I can call on the character movement the try jump function. It's just a quick example. So we could go and play our little dance animation. And our character is going to dance right at the end. Oh, did it not time right? At the very end. Should work. Not sure why it's ignoring the jump.
Whereabouts is the jump in the timeline? Is it? No, it's on the don't. I see. You don't activate the object.
I'll try this instead. Maybe it doesn't like it not being on here. It might be because I was deactivating the dolly cart. Let's try this.
Could be.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Oh no, his jump brings him out of the trigger and back into it again, so he's stuck dancing forever.
Perfect flow.
I wasn't expecting that. Okay. So yeah, the signal thing is a little bit more advanced, but I can cover it in depth later if you guys want to go over it, if you find a use for it in your team projects or funnel projects. But you can basically hook up existing code with the timeline system. So it's really useful for things like if you want your player character to move from one position to another and you don't need to animate the whole thing if it's just running from one point to another, you can just in the timeline call like a move to function and get it to go to a particular position.
Can we also use it to open stuff? Like,
yeah, if you had a door component with its own handling for opening a door, you could call like an open door function on it. The timeline system can be really useful for you guys in particular with your puzzles. If you need to grab a key to open a door or something like that, you could have a trigger that checks to see if the character has like a has key flag, and then that would kick off the timeline that would open the door. I want to adjust. We'll end class for today. I'm just going to fix my Pro Builder object here. So my character doesn't jump out of it. It should fix getting stuck dancing forever. The other thing you could add too, if you didn't want this, obviously this cinematic happening more than once, you could go and at the very end of your cinematic, grab your cinematic trigger. And just make sure it turns off at the end. In fact, let's have it active at the start. And afterwards, it's going to switch to inactive. In the hierarchy, I should see it go and turn itself off. Okay, so yeah, we're in a lunch now, so I'll let you guys go. If you have any questions in the future about timeline or cinematics or anything like that, you guys could try and work some of this stuff in your team projects to add a little bit of polish. I can help you out with it. And it's definitely a lot easier than coming up with like a coroutine, scripting a whole bunch of stuff working in your game.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, thank you for the class. I'm gonna go get some food.
No problem.
Thanks for covering
Thanks
the
for the
section.
class.
Yep.
Thank
To
you.
the class, Quinn.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye-bye.
I'll talk to you guys next week. I'll send you guys a message this afternoon. I'm going to get this stuff organized and onto a Google Doc or something, or maybe on our GitHub. I'm not sure where I'm going to put the class info. And I'll send that out to you guys. So you'll have a link to the playlist for the classes as well as all the stuff we produce in class.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
Bye.
But
Bye-bye.
this project will be available today, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for class. Bye.
See you guys next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
That went really smoothly, actually, for the most part. Just a couple of issues with a few